this. That's what needs to happen. Greetings, folks. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Just going to give folks a few minutes to join. We see the waiting room filling up. Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in 2 minutes. Glad to see everyone here. Actually, 1 more minute. Oh. All right, let's do this. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce Dr. Danielle Lemmy to kick us off.
All right, thank you so much, Terrence. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to kick us off with some housekeeping rules. Oh. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to kick us off with some housekeeping and rules of engagement. Just so that everyone knows, this is C3 nonpartisan research. Please don't use any partisan language or questions or ask partisan questions in the chat. Questions in the chat will be answered at the end. So just wanted to get that out of the way. But again, I am Danielle Lemmy. I am the Black Ops Research Manager. This research was led by Terrence and myself with significant contributions from the senior analysts who worked on this project, Kim Cardenas. And the comms team was led by Salam and Jared. And all of this was coordinated by our fantastic executive research assistant, Tyler. And I will get us ready to talk about the research. Terrence, you want to put the presentation
I'm so sorry. I just had the slides up. I am so sorry, folks. My PowerPoint just dropped.
Do you want me to share my screen, Terrence?
Yes, please, Tyler. I don't know what just happened. My PowerPoint just shut down.
No problem.
Sorry about that, folks.
All right. So today we will be talking about the research the Black Ops Coalition conducted on democracy. And we want to give a big thanks and express our deep appreciation to the members of the coalition, CVTU International, Way to Win, March on PAC, HUD, Black Economic Alliance, SEIU, Onyx Impact, the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, P68, and the NAACP. Thank you so much for being a part of this coalition and lending your time, your expertise. We are so proud that we were able to do this together. Next slide, please. So the Black Ops Coalition has been conducting this research for about a year now, and our main goal is to figure out what it will take to activate Black political power when the stakes have never been higher and the barriers have never been more deliberate. Ultimately, what we've been doing is investigating how we can increase Black people's willingness to take action against government policies and injustices that are harming Black communities economically, as well as in our democracy, federal government attacks on democracy. We wanted to understand how could we alleviate the barriers to Black political action taking and determine the tactics and the actions that Black voters are willing to take. And then we developed and tested content to mobilize Black voters to fight back against these actions from the federal government. And we also created an activation index that segmented the Black community from the most activatable to the least activatable. And all of this was done to help prepare Black voters to turn out in the upcoming November elections. Next slide, please. Again, go back. We did this in 2 phases. Beginning last year, we studied how Black voters can be activated to defend economic justice. We ran 3 focus groups, a national poll, and a national content test, working to identify the pain points that really resonated with Black voters, the attacks on Black voters that hurt Black communities economically, that resonated the most. And then we determined the barriers and the motivations to Black action taking. We took all of that and we replicated that with a question on, can Black voters be activated to defend democracy in phase 2 of the research? We ran some focus groups in October, January, and February. We ran a poll in April, and we ran a message test in June. Again, the whole goal was to determine how we could get Black voters to take action in November, leading up to November. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Terrence, who will dive into the details of the research.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And again, thank all of you for being here, for our generous partners, all of the coalition members, and to the press that is here. We're excited to finally roll out the second phase of this research. We started this over a year ago with the understanding and thesis that movements win elections, just like we saw in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, and in 2022 after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that mobilized young people across America. The problem is that in this current resistance movement, whether that be the ICE Out movement or the No Kings movement or Defend Democracy movements, that there has been that we have seen less activation of younger Black voters. And so that's what we've set out with the Black Ops Project to do, to build a more robust Black opposition, Black resistance. And so let's dive in and talk about the resistance, namely to understand what were the barriers that were preventing Black voters from resisting. Things like, and what we discover from the polls and the focus groups are things like fear of arrest, fear of violence, fear of professional retaliation, lack of a plan or leadership, this perception that it would not impact change if we took action now. And frankly, that 60% of Black voters said they had never been asked to resist. And so through this research, we've developed a list of tactical recommendations that we'll talk through, and messaging recommendations that we'll talk through. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about what we learned in phase 2. All right, phase 2 findings. We learned, number 1, that attacks on Black political power, that the reaction to the Calais decision, that subsequent efforts to eliminate Black seats across the South, that Black voters are aware of these things and that it is activating them. The more they are aware that these attacks on Black power are happening, the more activated they become. Number 2 is that the generation gap between younger Black voters and older Black voters continues to undermine participation in this movement from some of the young activists that fueled the movement for Black lives in 2020 and fueled the movement for abortion rights in 2022. Number 3, villains that Black people are most likely to blame for the decline of democracy include Donald Trump and MAGA, but equally include corporations and special interests that they see as capitulating and allowing some of the most egregious and nefarious actions. Number four, the pain points that we tested that connect attacks on democracy to economic impacts, such as wasteful spending, are most likely to motivate and increase Black political resistance. And number five is that the next generation must be the face of mobilizing Black voters, that when calls to action come from young voters, they are more likely to mobilize the entire Black electorate. And so you'll see as we go through this that we have focus group clips that have been media waived to be available to you for your coverage that could be used both in broadcast and in coverage. We also have the AI videos that we tested that will all be available on the website when we send this around. But let's dive into some more of the findings. Okay, so Danielle explained that a part of the goal here was to segment the Black electorate, to understand who were the most active. We call those the defenders. That was 30% of the Black electorate who are already taking 3 or more actions, who understand the urgency. Who are the activatables? Those that understand that we should take action, but have not taken 3 or more of these actions yet. That's 38% of the Black electorate. And who are the spectators that are on the sideline that are the Black voters that don't believe that it's our role to take action and don't believe and therefore haven't taken any of these actions? But what we have seen since initially conducting this research in October of last year is this increase in activity, increase in political resistance. In fact, in October of 2025, only 62% of Black voters said that they had taken 3 or more of these actions. By April of this year, we saw that increase to 75%. Notably, you'll see that the activatables here that we identified in October of 2025 have increased their political activity the most. We successfully identified who they were, and because of the actions of the movement of many of the folks in this coalition, we are beginning to mobilize those activatables who have increased their political activity by 18 points. Next slide. The more they know about these attacks, look, I've long said that that people who attempt to suppress Black votes should do so privately, because when Black folks understand that our power is under attack, that our votes are under attack, we return in kind, in power. And so the other thing that we found here is that um, Black voters are more our Black voters believe it is more urgent to take action to defend freedom. 75% of Black voters say it's urgent for us to defend Black freedom. 71% say it's urgent to defend Black voting rights. 71% also say it's urgent to defend racial justice. Notably here, we are much less likely to mobilize Black voters, especially young Black voters, to defend American democracy, where only 50% of Gen Z say that it's important for them to defend American democracy, compared to 73% of Gen Z who say that it is important for them to defend Black freedom. Next slide. We see that represented again here in this true or false question. Again, we will have there are focus group clips that are displayed here that we won't have time to play, but we encourage you to listen to them and also to use them in your coverage. Instead of hearing us describe what Black voters are saying, just listen to them in their own words. And one of the things that we continue to see in this question, in this true or false question, is the generation gap between younger Black voters and older Black voters, where we ask a question that you see highlighted in the blue here. Do Black people have had mixed results from democracy, and so it is not our job to defend it. While only 38% of Black people believe that, far under a majority of Black people, 56% of Gen Z believe that it is not our job to defend it. Young voters who have had mixed results from democracy are less likely to defend it, but it does not mean that we cannot mobilize them in this movement. We just have to mobilize them around the things that they care about most, namely protecting Black freedom and protecting Black voting rights. Next slide. And notably, when we ask Black voters, who is it that we should be fighting against? Who is it that is undermining American democracy? While I would have expected, talking to Black voters, that Donald Trump and MAGA would be at the top of the list, and they are, Black voters are equally likely to blame corporate interests, corporations and special interests who they see as capitulating to many of the more nefarious efforts of the federal government. This is why when we when we make calls to action to mobilize Black voters, we tested over a dozen actions that they could take to fight back, and actions that were most likely, I'm sorry, actions that Black voters were most likely to take include voting, but also include boycotting companies that they see as undermining democracy. Next slide, please. All right, so we tested both messengers, we tested messaging, and then we tested content that combined those messengers and messaging. And so when we asked Black voters, who do they trust the most to get information about how to defend democracy, Barack Obama rises to the top of this list. But notably, people like me, the trusted and civil rights groups, the trusted messengers here are one, their peers, and also the groups that are assembled in this coalition, the civil rights groups that are leading this movement and have had a track record of leading resistance movements for generations, are the type of messengers that they must hear from to mobilize them. And so we tested content. Next slide, please. And so we've identified 5 elements of messaging that mobilizes Black voters. The first is to connect the pain points, is to define the pain points and the villains, and connect that to how it is particularly hurting and harming the Black community. The second is extremely important, and that is demonstrating a proof of progress that reminds Black people of the progress that we have made when we have participated in collective action in the past. And some of the examples that we use here include the Target boycotts. They include the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, but they also include the resistance movement that stopped Georgia redistricting in a special session just a few weeks ago. And so proof of progress doesn't require us to reach so far into the past. We can pull examples that they have personally participated in or that they know people that have participated in. The third element is to highlight the motivations, namely that they will not be motivated by defending American democracy. And so connecting that democracy to freedom, to racial justice, and to their voting rights. The fourth is to inoculate the barriers that are preventing them, the barriers that we already spoke about, barriers like fear of arrest, fear of violence, and fear of political retaliation. That we inoculate those barriers through trainings and resources, access to legal representation, and organizing tactics that will mobilize collective action. And then finally, a call to action that focuses on the actions that they are most willing to take. Not everyone must protest, but everyone must do something. And the and the uh, and what Black Ops is, one of our theses going into this is that we can't just ask Black voters to wait until election day to take action. That there are actions that they can take today that will increase the likelihood that they will vote in November. And so we tested several messages here. Each of these messages represents a pain point, an example of undermining democracy, but all of them connect those pain points to economic realities. Whether it is the Iran war, the unconstitutional Iran war, and how it has contributed to wasteful spending and the increase of prices, or the invasion of cities of American cities by the National Guard occupation and connecting that to wasteful spending, or whether that is ICE violence and how that $75 billion that is being spent to fund ICE can be better used to fund solutions in our communities. And so on the next slide, we took the messengers that we tested, we took those messaging elements that you see there on the left, and we turned that into a script that you see there on the right, and we created five AI generated videos representing five different messengers in order to identify not just do these messages work on a page, but when they are delivered by different messengers, will they increase the likelihood of taking action? And so I want to show you one of these videos, one of the videos that tested the best, and then make sure that you have access to the other five. Okay, and if the video doesn't play, then we can drop
I
the
used to
link
think
for.
politics had nothing to do with me. But then I saw how much they were rigging the rules to make it harder for us to vote, eliminating the black members of Congress that our parents and grandparents elected, retracting the few gains that black people made, just to give tax breaks for rich people and fund endless wars. But somehow, there's never enough money for regular folks trying to survive. I can't ignore politics anymore. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes this country feels exhausted. But I've also seen what happens when people actually come together. I saw what happened after my parents protested in 2020. Cities were forced to make changes around policing and accountability. And when black communities stopped spending money at Target after they rolled back DEI programs, people paid attention. Losing billions would do that. That reminded me that our voices matter, but our money and our actions matter too. That's why I joined We Got Next. They're training young people to help register voters, work the polls, and protect people's right to vote. Because if our generation really has next, then we can't sit this one out. When we organize together and vote together, we can change things. Will you join We Got Next and help people in your community get registered to vote?
And so again, we tested five pieces of content, including the Gen Z gamer that you just saw. We tested an older black pastor.
I
We
used to
tested
think politics had nothing to do with me. But then I saw how much they were rigged.
First, we couldn't get him to play. Now we can't get him to shut up. And so again, we tested five different versions of this content with a young gamer, an older pastor, a young single father, a black elected official, and a retired senior, representing some of the trusted messengers that black voters told us that they wanted to hear from. And across all of these content tests, it was always the younger Gen Z or millennial messengers that mobilized black voters the most. And so from this Gen Z gamer, we see that he increased that this message from him increased likelihood that black voters will vote by 7 points, increased the likelihood they'll participate in voter registration drives by 11 points, increased the likelihood that they will post information about politics by 5 points, and increase the likelihood that they will participate in boycotts by 8 points. Listen, we know that if we can increase turnout of black voters by 7 points in places like Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, that this will change the outcome of the election. And so we have identified the messengers, identified the message, and have validated that these messages do, in fact, mobilize, increase resistance activity in order to increase the likelihood they vote in the upcoming election. And so again, we will make all of this content available to you. We have the deck, the recording from this video, all of the focus group clips that again have been media waived for you to use in your coverage, as well as all of these all five of the AI videos will all be available on the website. Before we open up to questions, we wanted to bring in some of our coalition members we can drop the slide. We'll bring in some of our coalition members to tell you a little bit about how they have been using the Black Ops research to mobilize the Black resistance in their work. And so first we will bring up Melanie Campbell.
Thank you, Terrence, and thank you to all of the coalition partners and your team. Well done, well done. This is phase one, and now phase two. I just want to briefly talk about how the research has helped us in our organizing as a coalition ourselves being able to know the power of bringing our groups together across generations. The other thing is the timing of what happened with the Cali case, Supreme Court Cali case. That was reached out by Black Voters Matter and LDF, and we did All Roads Lead to the South back in May. And that the reality is we saw what your data is showing. We saw young people really getting that this is their moment to really step up. And so I think what's important is as we move through the election cycle that we do what you're talking about. Really make sure that we focus in on young voters, the largest voting bloc for Black folks, as well as women, Black women, and the role that we play in moving our communities to the polls. We encourage our brothers to get to the polls, whatever relationships that we have. So that's going to be really, really critical. And the last thing I want to point out is the messaging, how important it is. We're hearing from our people that the issue around freedom and justice, then you can tie democracy to that, and not that we want to rebuild. We want to build something very, very new, and that's the change I think that the message has to be. And lastly, I think it's really important that other kinds of actions that must be taken. I think we are birthing a new movement. I think your research is identifying that. So we're going to continue to work on this and use this information to mobilize our people. More importantly, to build a movement for change. This is a country that we built. We've been under full attack, but we are fighting back. And
Thank you so much.
united, we will win. And united, we will win.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Can you talk a little bit more about All Roads Lead South, where you all went, how many people you activated, and the kind of results that you saw in places like Georgia and South Carolina?
Well, I was trying to stay in my 2 minutes. One of the things that was really important is that when we mobilized to Selma and to Montgomery, we went back not for reenactment, but to reignite the current movement, to ignite a new movement around our rights and freedoms. Understanding that voting rights is core to that. So we had thousands of people who showed up, but we also utilized technology. We had Roland Martin Unfiltered and many other folks that are part of what I call a new media ecosystem. Influencers, and I know the research talks about that, the importance of influencers who are trusted messengers. So as organizations, as influencers, building that kind of a massive coalition of well over, I think it was 170 organizations that participated in that All Roads Lead to the South movement. And then we went to Mississippi and worked with NACP and others who pulled that together, our organization and many of it, and labor, the importance of labor in the movement. When I see your numbers, and I know there's these numbers that break down, I know that when we're talking about civil rights, we're talking about civil rights and labor at the same time. We are one movement. And so I think that's really important that people identify that. And then when we're out here fighting together, we were fighting as a coalition. Then also Georgia. I was in Georgia with some of our same folks that I'm talking about, and was in the Capitol where we were together and saw that victory because folks showed up. And if you and the key is to be able to show up and feel that you are safe in that by making sure that we are concerned about safety, as has been identified as one of those barriers for people, that we have to build the kind of coalitions that inclusive of making sure that we're dealing with their safety. It's a big concern as we go into this election cycle, as we see the news every day of them continue to find ways to kind of attack our rights and freedoms, and using our voting rights as the linchpin to that. But like I said, we're ready for the fight.
Thank you so much, Mel. I think that what happened in Georgia and South Carolina, where you all were able to implement many of the findings of the Black Ops Project to inoculate the barriers that we saw. Barriers like fear of violence, that collective action inoculates that fear of violence. When all of us are acting together, it begins to inoculate that. And most important, that we achieved the outcome that we wanted. We prevented them from eliminating 2 congressional seats in Georgia, prevented them from eliminating Clyburn's seat in South Carolina, and that when we take credit for those actions, when we demonstrate that when we when we resist together, we win together.
And one
Terry,
last point, if you will. The key to all roads lead to the South was to nationalize this, because it's not just what's happening in the South; it's what's happening in the United States of America.
that's right.
And 55% of Black people live in the South. So the target, what happens in the South, is really what's happening, impact all over this nation. So we want to make sure that we're clear with that. And that was the when I got that call from folks that said, "Hey, we need to do this," it was really was an easy yes, right? That we have to come together in a way that we have not had to come together before, and that cannot be about one election. This is about the future of where we're going. This is an authoritarian state that we're living under, and we have to have new ways to fight. But part of that is the ability to bring strong coalitions together across generations, is vital.
That's exactly right, Mel. Thank you so much for that. We've long known that the South were not red states; they were just oppressed states, and as they have demonstrated oppression loud and clear, they are experiencing the backlash. And Georgia knew that they had to avoid that backlash by abandoning their efforts to eliminate those seats. I want to go to Terry Melvin, president of CBTU, to talk a little bit about how he's using the Black Ops work to mobilize Black resistance.
Thanks a lot, Terrence. And let me join Melanie in congratulating you and your team on the work that you have been able to do with the research. Look, the voters were watching and are awakened to the fact that Black voters took a major hit when the majority of the Supreme Court ruled that race would no longer be defendable criterion for drawing maps that fully represent people in voting districts. The decision was an outright attack on the Voting Rights Act, and voters are more determined to show up and vote in the upcoming midterm elections as a result. It's not just the voters in the South, as Melanie said. This decision is influencing Midwest, West Coast, and East Coast voters who are persuaded to protect their freedom to cast ballots in the midterm elections from the beginning. This research that has been developed is helping us, CBTU, sharpen messages to Black voters in areas that motivate them to take action as well as go to the polls and vote. As we will be mobilizing voters to the polls this election, our strategy matters in how we reach different sets of voters based on who has influence. We learn that the right message delivered by the appropriate messenger can move the needle, and that's what we're going to be using. This research has been a breakthrough and has brought leaders and organizations together to unify over how we engage voters to activate to protect freedoms that have been hard fought for and won, but are now under attack those who just want to oppress us. And look, Terrence, we are determined not to allow our rights to be further eroded, not on our watch. We got work to do, and we're going to use the research that has been done thus far and that's going to be continuing to be done in this area to make sure we get our folks out to vote so that they can maintain the freedoms that they have.
Thank you so much, Reverend Melvin. We want to go to Dominic Whitehead from NAACP, but before we do that, I see there's a couple of questions here. If we can go to Nicordali and Khalil to ask your questions, and maybe NAACP may answer that in their remarks, or I can come back and provide some insights from the research. Dr. Nicordali. Dr. Nee, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Hey, Terrence, and good morning, everybody. I wanted to sort of go back to something that Melanie Campbell had shared. And I'm wondering if there's anything that came up in your research related to this frame that I've been hearing a lot about from organizers on the ground, whether they're talking about Melanie or Latasha Brown, among others. This frame around, shifting our viewpoint from just being sort of activists responding to the moment to being sort of new founders. This idea of being the founders of a new America, how does that resonate or not across generations?
Yeah, Nee, this is one of the things that we have seen in this research and in subsequent research by HIT is that while Black voters are less mobilized by defending democracy, they are mobilized by renewing democracy, remaking democracy, revitalizing democracy. That there is a clear expectation that that the Trump administration is remaking our democracy in his image, maybe in not a democracy at all. And that has led to an expectation of Black voters that we won't just reform around the margins, but that we will remake this democracy to better to unrig the rules and better serve the not just the Black community, but communities at large. Khalil, and then we're going to Chief Dom.
Thank you, Terrence. Thank you, Hit. Thank you, everybody. Just curious if we saw, on a messaging standpoint, how we can translate this differently. If we saw a massive turnout in Georgia and in South Carolina in their primaries, but we saw in DC and Maryland and some other states that are sitting in the bastion of some of where this political context is, and turnout was lower there, what are we missing in how we're translating this information to those voters in those areas where they're getting fed all of what's happening with Donald Trump on a daily basis, but it's not turning them into more active voters. They're choosing just not to not they're choosing a no vote because they don't see an option for them. So how does this research help us better engage that voter as opposed to the voters we're also seeing in South Carolina and Georgia?
Yeah. So what I at least what I've observed, Khalil, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that while turnout was not lower in places like Maryland and DC, it was about as low as Democratic primaries often are. It was significantly surged in Georgia and South Carolina. And what that tells me is that when confronted by attacks on our power, we will respond in kind. And so I think what we saw across the South is the backlash of Black voters saying, you F around and you're going to find out. And I think what Melanie and Reverend Melvin are describing is how do we amplify what is happening in the South so that Black voters know that we are all the South and that because half of us are represented in the South, we must defend the South no matter where we are. And I know that there may be some other questions from the press, but first I want to give another one of our coalition members, Chief Dominic from NAACP, a chance to tell us a little bit about how the NAACP is using Black Ops to mobilize Black voters.
No, thank you for this, Terrence, and Team Hit. And I think, our amazing leaders, Melody Campbell and Reverend Terry Melvin, really hit it on the head. I think for the NAACP, for us, as you know, Terrence, we've been working with Hit for years in terms of thinking through our research and how we are really using that to engage voters. But with Black Ops, particularly in this second phase, I think Reverend Melvin mentioned it is the alignment. And so for us at the NAACP, it's messaging alignment, messaging discipline, and then messaging implementation. So what I mean by that for us, when we say messaging alignment, being aligned in terms of what the messaging is, realizing, as you just shared through the research, both in phase 1 and in phase 2, that Black voters are not a monolith, right? We're seeing the increase of engagement around Gen Z, right? So this research to continue to see that, how are we engaging and continue to have an intergenerational organizing approach? That's one of the things that the association is doing this cycle, is making sure that we're putting young people in the movement. Young people are part of the strategies in terms of how we're engaging Black voters overall. But then message discipline, how we're staying on message throughout the cycle. And when messaging changes, how do we change that, right? And making sure that when we're changing our message, that we are all disciplined around that. Also recognizing that all of us have lanes, right? And so that's what I love about the coalition and the research right now. You have labor, you have civil rights, you have some progressive groups. We all may be messaging to Black voters in a different way because, again, I'm going back, we're not a monolith in terms of a community, how we need to be communicated to. And then finally, my favorite part is message implementation, right? How are we implementing this messaging, whether it is on the doors, we're talking to voters on the doors and community, right? Whether it is tying in influencers, we're seeing this piece with Gen Z, Right, we're hearing this piece that folks don't always want to hear from celebrities. They want to hear from local influencers and local folks. So how we're getting these messages to folks who can carry the message. We'll say it all the time at NAACP. We're a legacy organization. We're a trusted name, but in some communities, some folks might not just want to see the NAACP. And so we may have to give that message to somebody else who can carry that message in a very different way. And we are okay with that because we got to win, right? And we got to turn out voters around in this process. And so for us, when we say message and implementation, we're looking at the research on how we are the defenders, how we're giving the defenders, that 30% of folks that you talked about, how we're giving them the messages to continue to do the work, because we know they're going to be the front line every single day, right? The activatables, or the folks that we can move. What do we need to do to make sure they move from the couch and saying I'm mad and upset to the streets and knocking on doors, making phone calls, engaging voters, et cetera? And then the spectators, for us, that falls into that GOTV universe, how we're taking our defenders and our activables, right, and making sure they're engaging voters through all the different tactics. So for us, alignment, discipline, and implementation are the three ways that we're looking at the research.
Thank you so much, Dom. We want to open up to any additional questions from the press or from anyone else about the research, about how members of the coalition are using the research, or about the next phases of research. Garen, what's up, brother?
Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for doing this. I have two questions. Based on this data, members of the Democratic Party aren't the best messengers to mobilize Black voters. How can Democratic candidates who say they are fighting for Black communities close that gap and take advantage of this increased concern and awareness over freedoms? And secondly, what does this data signal about what Democrats should be prioritizing should they win majorities in Congress?
Very, very good questions. And so first, I should start out with this is see-through research that was not about electing Democrats. It was this is less about ensuring that Democrats win and more about making sure that Black people win. But what we did find in phase one is that there is a perception gap in the Black community where over 60% of Black people expect Democrats in Congress to be fighting for the Black community, but only 30% of Black people see Democrats in Congress fighting for the Black community. I think that is a clarion call to Democrats to better represent the fight that Black voters are demanding, and to better represent the frustration and anxiety. I think that the last thing that we can do in this moment is to ask Black voters to wait until election day to fight back. That is, in fact, demoralizing. There's over a dozen actions we can get them to take now, and some of those actions include applying pressure to Democrats, which we have seen across, this Democratic primary cycle, where voters, including Black voters, have continued to support and elect the candidates, even in Democratic primaries, that they believe will fight for them in this moment. Oh, the second question was, what do Democrats need to prioritize? Since we started this work last year, there were some flashpoints where Democrats were seen to be fighting for the Black community, namely in the government shutdown. When Democrats held the line on the funding bill, on funding the government, and held the line to protect Obamacare subsidies, that broke through, that Black voters heard that they repeated that back to us in focus groups. And so that is the kind of work that I think Democrats in Congress and beyond must do, is to not just be the minority party, but to be the opposition party. And opposition is a form of action, not just waiting to be the majority, but taking actions now up to and including shutting down the government to prevent further harm from happening.
Thank you.
Clyde McGrady.
Thank you. I was wondering if you're seeing any excitement from Gen Z voters around groups like DSA, Democratic Socialists for America, who had some success recently in primaries.
Yes, so this research did not really focus on that, but subsequent hit research and all of our observations of the primary confirmed that DSA movements are being fueled by young people, and that young coalition that is fueling DSA and other progressive movements, including working families, that coalition includes a lot of young black voters, where young voters and young black voters have become less likely to identify as Democrats or Republicans as they are to identify as independents. This represents what HIT has long said is that um, the new swing voters that will determine the outcome of the next election and that determined the outcome of the last election are not just suburban white women, are not just white working class voters, but the new swing voters that will determine the outcome of this election are young people of color and men of color. And we see that being represented in many of the primary outcomes that we've seen so far this season. And I'll be looking
Terrence,
very closely at Michigan, where Black voters are going to have a sizable impact on the Democratic nominee selection. And where Black voters land in that primary will tell us a lot about their support for these progressive movements.
Terrence, the one thing, and I'm not being partisan, just factual, is that it is about who young people see as have that it's about power. I think that's really important. Your research in the past has really shown that. So it is about not seeing them being weak, but having using whatever power levers that they have, and that the young people themselves have the power to make that change. That they feel like they have the agency. That's what we're hearing from our young people, and I think that's really, really critical and vital. Whatever party.
That's right. Any other questions? Garen or Clyde, do you have another question? Is your hand still up? And does anyone else have questions? Either here, let me check the chat. Nothing in the chat. All right, before we wrap up, I just want to reiterate a couple of things and then give a chance for HIT's comms team to tell you a little bit more about what to expect over the course of this rollout. Again, Black voters will determine the outcome of many of these elections and Black voters do not want to wait until election day to fight back. And in fact, asking them to wait until election day is in fact quite demoralizing. There's over a dozen actions that we can get them to take today as long as those calls to action inoculate some of the barriers that they've expressed, and that those calls to action are being driven and led by their peers, namely by young people. Holly, I see you got a question there. Garen, I see your hand still up. We'll come to you right after Holly.
There we go. Unmute. That's important. There seems to be, and would love to see what the research says, there seems to be some tension between voting as an action and other kinds of actions. What kind of feedback are you seeing, or can you help us with to either connect the two or to ensure that a protest is not seen as a protest versus vote, but that it is actually a suite of actions that need to happen? And I think that we are starting to see a lot of division, which I think is a false division, but it's happening, right? Between the people who think that protest is the thing, and I'm using protest, but direct action kinds of activities versus voting.
Yeah, great question, Holly. A part of how we explain this, and this is a slide that will be included in the deck when we publish it, we just didn't present it today, is to look, we've long known that perceptions of power, that when Black people believe that they have power to make a difference in their community, that increases their activity. The problem is that those perceptions of power, because of conventional political messaging, have all centered on electoral power, when in fact, we have to expand that cycle of power to include not just your power to elect officials, but your power to negotiate with them, to move them closer to your position, your power to hold them accountable and to protest when they don't move to your position. And then, namely, and the one that a lot of young people really, really like, is the punitive power to fire them when they do not take the actions that you want. And so, one of the main goals of Black Ops has been to expand that cycle of power beyond just your vote has power to you have political power far beyond your vote. And we have to exercise all of that now because getting them to take actions now to express, to defend their power now makes it more likely that they will express that power on election day.
I just want to hone in on the expand part and how do we tamp down on the versus part?
Right.
Because that's really what I'm seeing happening now. And we're hearing that more and more. And I don't know if the research is showing that as well. But to your point, the message around expand, 100%. The problem is in the expansion, it has been a comparison has been created that is now got, and we even see some public figures, quite frankly and disturbingly, saying, yeah, do this, but don't do this.
Right.
And one of the things they're saying don't do in terms of the expansion is vote. And so I want to make sure the expansion doesn't become a replacement message.
That's exactly right. I think that's spot on, Holly. It is expand rather than versus.
Oh, whoops.
Expand the power rather than versus the power. Clyde McGrady.
Thanks. I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but what you just said I thought was interesting. I was wondering, is there anything that you've learned from the right as far as how the right wields power or activates its voters to keep them engaged? Is there anything you've learned that you want to emulate? And is there anything that you've learned that you think may be a pitfall?
Yeah. Look, I have learned quite a bit observing the right, but so have Black voters. Black voters have learned quite a bit about our political system, observing how Donald Trump yields power, namely that all of this, all of these institutions, all of these norms, it's all movable. And so what we are hearing from Black voters is a demand for radical reform, not marginal reform. Because what they have seen from Donald Trump is the ability to harness every lever of power. We heard it in focus groups that he's using museums and colleges and private sector and media and pressure on networks and pressure on companies and pressure on institutions that he's using every lever of power to bring about the change that he seeks, and they are demanding equal, if not greater, expressions of power from Democrats if they hand Democrats victory in either or both of these chambers of power. So one of the things one of the quotes I heard in the focus group was, "I don't want to hear from Democrats what's not possible. I don't want to hear from Democrats what's not affordable, what is unreasonable." Because they are watching Donald Trump do things, shift the Constitution, shift the definition of citizenship with the stroke of a pen, although that was overturned by the court. But they are watching him yield power in ways that is going to set a very high bar for Democrats to deliver meaningful and radical change and not just marginal reforms around the edges. I think it's incumbent upon Democrats to define what that change is that their most loyal voters are demanding, and to find that out before they get handed a gavel. They can call hit strategies to help with that. Listen, this is not the end of the conversation, just the beginning. In fact, I would like to invite Jared or Salam from who are helping with the comms around this to tell a little bit more about what to expect from the rest of this release, and what type of materials we'll be sending over to you and when.
Thanks, Terrence. So I will put all of our contact info in the chat here. Feel free to reach out to me or to any of the folks who spoke today. We are going to be sending out a press release shortly, and we can also provide information on the deck here as is useful. And obviously, this is not sort of a simple one-size-fits-all story. So we're happy to have further conversations as your reporting develops on the topic.
I will be available. Many of the coalition members will be available for media inquiries to answer more questions about the research or about how they are using the research in their work. Again, I want to encourage you to take a look at and use some of the focus group footage that's available. Of course, we'll get the deck, the data, and all of these materials to you for your coverage. And happy to talk more about it. Once again, thank you to the before I close out, any other questions about what to expect and when to expect it? Since I know you are all enthusiastically can't wait to cover it. No, seriously, thank you again to all of the HIT team that has worked diligently. Thank you to the members of the coalition that have supported this work. And thank you to all of the media and partners that have expressed interest in this work. We are a resource to all of you, so please use us up.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Thanks,
Thanks,
team.
everybody. Bye-bye.